Good afternoon and welcome to our Missouri Prairie Foundation webinar, Take a Virtual Hike on the Prairie, Fall Edition with Bruce Schuette. My name is Emily Gustafson with the Missouri Prairie Foundation, and I want to thank you all for joining us for the webinar today. During the presentation, if you have any questions, please only put them in the Q&A section on your screen. And at the end, I will read those out to Bruce. This webinar is being recorded, and the link will be shared with all of you tomorrow, along with resources mentioned during the presentation and Q&A section. And now for some background on Bruce. Bruce Schuette retired from working 36 years as a park naturalist at Quiver River State Park, where he was involved in natural resource management, prescribed burns, invasive plant control, ecosystem management, natural resource inventory, collections monitoring, working with researchers, and nature education. He has served on the MPF board since January of 2000, served as secretary 2005 to 2012, and is vice president of Science and Management and chairman of the Science and Management Committee. We are excited to have Bruce here today to show us around Golden Prairie in Barton County and share his prairie knowledge with us. Now let's take a virtual hike with Bruce.
Well, welcome to Golden Prairie for our second virtual hike this year. The first one we did in kind of late spring, and so we saw what the prairie looked like then, some of the plants that were out and some of them that were on their way out. So we're back to take a look at what the same area looks like at pretty much at the end of the growing season. So we'll see some of the fall blooming wildflowers. We'll see some of them that what's left from plants that we did see before. Certainly the whole prairie will look quite a bit different because before it had recently been or it still hadn't grown back from the last prescribed burn this last winter, but now the grasses are getting nice and tall again, and you can see why it's called a tallgrass prairie. As you get farther to the west, there's not as much rain, and the prairie grasses don't get this tall, and those are short and midgrass prairies. But so welcome here to Golden Prairie. Golden Prairie is one of the Missouri Prairie Foundation's earliest acquisitions. The remnant prairie here, the really good main part of Golden Prairie, is 320 acres, and it was acquired in 1970 mostly, and then a little bit added on in 1974. So those two purchases make up the 320 acres of the good remnant prairie that we're on here. It has been recognized for the quality of this prairie as both a national natural landmark designated by the National Park Service back in 1975, and then more recently these 320 acres have been designated as a Missouri State Natural Area. If you happen to see Mike Leahy's webinar a couple weeks ago, he talked about the natural area system, and Golden Prairie was included in that system a few years ago. So it's a designated Missouri State Natural Area by the Missouri Natural Areas Committee, as well as a National Natural Landmark. And we have this prairie here today largely because of the previous owners. It was the Pugh family and Lowell Pugh who was involved in the Missouri Prairie Foundation for many years, but long before that, he grew up on this prairie. This was part of his family farm. And so he became very interested in protecting prairies. He became one of the leading prairie conservationists in southwestern Missouri. He was instrumental with the Missouri Prairie Foundation. And so his family sold us this 320-acre prairie back in the 70s. Since that time, we have actually added about 310 acres to that, but that's mostly either old crop field, which has been reconstructed into reconstructed prairie, or much more degraded remnant prairie, not the quality of this original 320 acres. But their whole complex here is 630 acres that the Prairie Foundation owns. Prairie.
Hi, everyone. I am so sorry that it looks like my internet just dropped briefly, so I will restart the video here in just a moment. My sincerest apologies. I will get this going again in just a moment here. I'm so sorry about that.
This area is still in the Ozark Highlands, but it's a portion of it called the Springfield Plains, which had extensive prairies before Euro-American settlement, and does still have, fortunately, at least a few nice remnants that we have left in this area. When you look inside this little jar here, you can see some of the little things that kind of make the prairie go. There are things we oftentimes overlook when we're walking through the prairie, all these tiny insects and invertebrates, but they're some of the key components out here in this prairie community. In fact, probably there's like a whole food web inside this little jar, because some of the insects are herbivores that are eating the plants. There's predatory ones. There are some spiders in there, which of course are predators. And so these are all key components to the prairie community, just parts that are often overlooked. Besides many of the insects being herbivores, which are basically, they're eating the plants and turning the plant material into animal material, which then feeds many other animals, including our grassland birds and many of the other animals. But there are also many insects out here on the prairie are also important pollinators. And when we have things in flower, oftentimes you can find an abundance of the pollinators coming to those flowering plants. And in some cases, some of the insects are very specialized. This wildflower here, which is typical of prairies late in the summer, is blue sage, and there is actually a bee in Missouri called the blue sage bee that gathers pollen just from this particular species. So in many cases there's very intricate relationships between some of the plants out here and then some of the insects or some of the pollinators. Certain beetles will only feed on one or a few different kinds of plants and nothing else. So there are a lot of very intricate relationships out here on that kind of scale. So here we have a couple of the classic fall prairie plants. Goldenrods are some of the goldenrods at least. And so here we have one called rigid goldenrod, a really pretty one for a goldenrod. It's got much larger yellow flowers than many of them do, and then it's got a stem that's kind of rough feeling, and the leaves are kind of rough feeling, but it has this very distinctive kind of flat topped appearance, the way the inflorescence comes up, and so you get a very flat topped appearance to the flower head. Then when we step over here, we can see one of the really remnant dependent species of goldenrods, one of the nicer ones to have around, and also a very showy one, which is appropriately called showy goldenrod. It also has, for goldenrods, kind of larger flowers than most of them do, again making it probably a little bit prettier. But this one, the stem is perfectly smooth, the leaves are smooth, the leaves just kind of get smaller as you go up the stem from larger basal leaves. So this is the showy goldenrod, which since it's one of the more remnant dependent ones, is a really good one to find out here. So these are a couple of typical fall bloomers. As we talked about when we did the hike in the spring, throughout the season you're going to get a change in what's in flower here. So at any one time you come out, you're only going to see a subset of what's out here in bloom. Some bloom early, some bloom middle of summer, some bloom late. So the goldenrods typically are some of the later ones, but there is still signs of a lot of the earlier ones out here, either just the plants themselves, or in many cases you can now see their seeds or remnants of their seeds, which can help you identify them. So if we come right over here, this is goat's rue. Goat's rue is in the legume family. When it flowers during the summer, it gets very large sort of pea-like flowers that are two-toned, part kind of yellow and part pink, very pretty large pea-like flower. It's got these dissected leaves, and when it goes to seed, it has these pods that as they open up kind of twist or curl, so it's got these very distinctive seed pods on it. Now, looking very similar to the goat's rue, but another really good remnant-dependent species is lead plant that you can see right here. And the lead plant is very similar looking, and sometimes they can be kind of difficult to tell apart, or you have to really study them up close, because the foliage does look very similar. Lead plant is actually kind of considered a woody shrub. It does have a woody base, and in years when there's no disturbance like haying or burning, it can get quite a bit bigger because of the woody stem it has. When it was in flower, the flowers are totally different looking than the goat's rue. The flowers are tiny little purple flowers, almost like little purple cylinders, which I believe is actually like one of the petals that forms kind of the little purple cylinder, and then you can see the bright yellow stamen sticking out. So it's really pretty flowers, kind of deep purple with the yellow tips, but they are very small, and you do have to get down close to really see them in detail. But this is what it looks like when the lead plant goes to seed. So again, quite different. The plants, the foliage itself is very similar, but the flowers, and then when you see it in seeds, there's a big difference between the lead plant and the goat's rue. And again, this is really one of the very good remnant-dependent species we have. Lead plant is a pretty classic prairie plant, probably called lead plant because it's got a dense hairiness that gives the foliage kind of this grayish color that you notice, and so it's kind of a lead color, and that may be where it got the name lead plant. Okay, we're really fortunate here that one of our more summer flowers, but a few of them are still hanging on, and a couple of them still have flowers left. And this is one of them, the fringed poppy mallow. It's a beautiful flower, and is found on a number of our prairies here in southwest Missouri. Besides being the fringed poppy mallow, some people also call it wine cup. Because with just kind of the shape and the color of it, it does look like a kind of the shape of a cup full of red wine. So this is the fringed poppy mallow. This is a good remnant dependent species on the 0 to 10 score. We talk about this one, I believe, is a 9. So it's a really good remnant dependent species. Another remnant dependent species, which is more typical this time of year on the prairie, is the sky blue aster, or azure aster. And so this one, small, little, beautiful, bright blue flowers, and the stem itself is kind of sandpapery or sort of rough feeling. And so this is another good remnant dependent species. Then we also have a couple other species here. This one is one of the desmodiums, one of the tick trefoils. This is sessile-leaf tick trefoil, which is a good characteristic prairie plant. And while it flowered during the summer, you can see its seeds, which are the things that they've always called them beggars' lice. They're the seeds that will stick to your clothes. I've got a lot of them stuck to my pants right now. So this is the tick trefoil. And it can, I believe, be pretty good food for some wildlife, some of the birds in that, the seeds inside, and it's certainly got a very efficient way of spreading itself around. I know I've spread lots and lots of seeds of this and other tick trefoils over the years. Okay, here we have a couple more of our remnant-dependent plant species, which we always like to see these species because with them growing here, they just don't tolerate too much human disturbance. So to find them growing here is telling us that this is a high-quality prairie natural community that has never been plowed and is a good, stable, intact, old-growth prairie. This one here is one called rough white lettuce with these sort of real pretty cream-colored flowers. And this is one that, like many of the plants here, the Native Americans that had lived here for thousands of years, this and many of these plants are ones that they did use. Medicinally, they used them. So it's kind of interesting sometimes to take a look at how things were used culturally in the past. Today we think of them mostly as something, beautiful for us to see. Or we tend to think of them for maybe their ecological reasons. But to people that lived out here on the prairie for thousands of years, a lot of these plants were literally very crucial to them for food, for medicine, things like that. Same kind of thing with this one, which is, of course, again, past flower now, but this is purple prairie clover. There's two kinds of prairie clovers that are typical of our prairies. The white one has a little bit larger leaves than this, and on the purple one, these leaves are broken down into very fine little segments. And so this, we can tell even past flower that this is the purple prairie clover. So midsummer, just beautiful bright purple flower clusters, small flowers on the top of the stem. Now it's gone to seed. But this again is one of the good indicator prairie or remnant dependent species that we have here. Okay, last time we were out here in the prairie in kind of late spring, and this part of the prairie had been burnt off like we need to do to maintain the prairie. It was burnt off last winter, and when we were here before, most of the grasses were still pretty small. They were pretty inconspicuous. You could see real easily across the landscape. But our main prairie grasses are what are called warm season grasses. And so as opposed to many kind of grasses, and a lot of times the grasses people grow in their lawns and that grow better in cool seasons, the prairie grass, the main prairie grasses, there's cool season grasses out here, but the main prairie grasses are warm season grasses. So they grow best during the hotter part of the summer. So when we were here before, there wasn't, too much of the grasses to see. They were very, the regrowth this year had been very short, was still very short. Now they've taken off, and so you can see now it really looks like, or you can see why it's called a tallgrass prairie.
Apologies again for my internet connection. I will restart the video where we left off. Again, I'm so sorry about this. This should not be happening, and my sincerest apologies.
Like, or you can see why it's called a tallgrass prairie. Of the prairie grasses out here, there's sort of three main types. One of them is little blue stem, which you can see right here. Little blue stem gets these kind of wispy seed, kind of wispy lines of seeds coming out and kind of arching from the side of the stem. And with the name little blue stem, it's got a shorter stature than some of the other ones. It also really shows up very well as we get a little bit more into the fall. We tend to think of fall colors as being in the woods, not so much out in grasslands, but little blue stem kind of cures to a really pretty sort of wine red color. So it can be really distinctive and add a nice touch of color to the prairie as we go through the fall. So we just saw little blue stem. Now here's big blue stem, which in stature does get quite a bit taller. And big blue stem is also very distinctive when it gets its flowers, or when the flowers then turn into seeds, because they tend to form in long, narrow little spikes that are joined kind of at the base, so you get this sort of prong look. Or oftentimes you'll get sort of like three prongs, which kind of reminded people in the past of a bird's foot or a turkey foot. And so big blue stem also was frequently referred to as old turkey foot because of this arrangement. So we have little blue stem, which is very abundant, big blue stem, which is really abundant on our tallgrass prairies, and it can get much taller than this. This is about 5.5 feet tall. I can see others that are probably 6 and 7 feet tall, and in a wet year and right situation, it can be 9 or 10 feet tall. Here's the third of our sort of main warm season prairie grasses. This one is Indian grass. And unlike the big blue stem that's got the kind of prong-like look to the flowers and the seeds, on Indian grass it just kind of looks like a plume or a feather-like top on the stem of the grass. So quite distinctive looking from the other ones, and usually it's kind of in between in stature. It can be a little bit taller, sometimes about as tall as a big blue stem, but usually it's not quite as tall as big blue stem, but it's usually bigger than little blue stem. But easy to tell when it's in flower like the other ones because of the arrangement of the flowers and the seeds. But on the Indian grass, you can also get an idea that that's what it is during the or earlier in the season, because when you kind of pull the base of the leaf blade away from the stem, there's kind of a little tooth that sticks up. That one broke off. We'll see if. And so that little tooth that sticks up right from the base of the leaf blade, that's distinctive on the Indian grass and will help you recognize it earlier in the season when it hasn't got the flowers or the seeds yet. So here, kind of nestled among the big blue stem and in with the showy goldenrod, we have what some people consider maybe the prettiest of the Prairie-Fall asters. This one, which is called Southern Bog Aster or Slimleaf Bog Aster, has these bright blue ray flowers. Just a really pretty plant. It doesn't get very tall, so if it's not in flower, it would be difficult to pick it out here in the taller grasses this time of year. But when you see it in flower like this, it's just a beautiful aster to have here. And also, again, another one of the really good remnant dependent species. This one on the 0 to 10 scale is a 9. So this is, so we have this system that botanists and ecologists have described for giving a 0 to 10 score for each of our native plants on kind of how faithful it is to a native remnant landscape. And so plants that are they kind of thrive on disturbance. Even native plants that thrive on disturbance would have a low value, like a 0, 1, 2, or 3. And then kind of the matrix plants, they're not totally maybe restricted to a high quality remnant site, but they're part of that system. They're a big part, they're kind of the matrix of a stable remnant prairie community. And then we have the ones that are like 7, 8, 9, and 10, and we call these ecologically conservative species or remnant dependent species. So these are ones that don't tolerate too much the wrong kinds of especially human induced disturbances, and so when you find them, it's virtually always on a remnant prairie or a remnant natural habitat. If it's been, greatly disturbed, they're not going to be there anymore. They're probably not going to come back because they're largely missing in the surrounding landscapes. And so we have them here indicating or telling us kind of the ecological history of the site, that if you find those, it's been a prairie. But not everything out here is dependent on it being a remnant. So we have ones like the pale purple coneflower. This is a good remnant dependent species. So this one tells us that it's a prairie. The purple prairie clover here, another remnant dependent species. So we have all these high C value plants, which is very important to show that this is a remnant prairie. But there are the other plants out here too. So like this thistle is like a 3 or a 4. The oxeye is maybe about a 5. So a lot of what you see out here are plants that are in that matrix range. But there are also, even out on a remnant prairie, you will find a few of the kind of disturbance plants out here, because there are little disturbances and that going on. So they are part of the system. But we also want those remnant dependent species here to know that this is a good remnant prairie. It's never been plowed or that in the past. It is a good remnant prairie that we're conserving here, and it has those very unique species that really need that in order to survive. It's kind of interesting to see this little one in flower now. This is violet wood sorrel, which is usually a pretty common sight in our prairies in the spring. It's typically a fairly early spring blooming wildflower, but there are a few plants that will flower typically in the spring, but sometimes will flower again in the fall. And this is one that sometimes does it. So a spring flower, but it does sometimes show up again in the fall. And then right over here we have one of our really common sort of classic prairie wildflowers, rosinweed. And it has a yellow sunflower-like flower, but rosinweed is in the same genus and is closely related to compass plant and a couple others like cup plant and prairie dock. And and typical of that group of plants is that when you look at their flower, the center part, only the outer ring of flowers is fertile. The flowers in the middle are all sterile and never produce any seeds. So when you go to like collect seeds from it, the middle part is all just kind of chaff and there won't be any seeds in there. And you get just a ring of kind of flattened seeds around the outside edge. In this case, all the middle part, the kind of chaff, has already fallen away, and you can see just the ring of seeds, these flat seeds, around the outside edge. So that's typical of rosinweed, but also compass plant and just the other couple members of the Silphium genus. And here we have a really nice one. This is American blue hearts. And American blue hearts are really interesting because they're, again, one of the plants out here that is partially parasitic. So its roots can get nutrients from some of the surrounding plants. It's still green, and so it's not a total parasite, but it is a partially parasitic plant, and now they're put into a family of plants that constitutes pretty much all the ones that are parasitic or partially parasitic, like this one. And it's also a really nice one to find here because on our 0 to 10 scale, American blue hearts is a 10. So this is again another really good one to have here, showing this being a remnant dependent species, indicating a good remnant prairie. We have a nice little grouping of things here, kind of working up our scale. We do have downy sunflower or ashy sunflower. So this is a really abundant species out here and in many prairies. So earlier in the summer it had the really nice big sunflower-like flower on it. And so it's like one of the matrix species out here. Another one being this one, the prairie blazing star. So this is kind of a highlight for many people during the summer because these whole spikes can be covered in tiny little purple flowers that gives just the whole top of the stem this bright purple appearance. And so it's one of the really showy summer wildflowers out here on our prairies. And another characteristic one, oftentimes at about the same time, is rattlesnake master. And rattlesnake master is a really interesting plant. It's actually in the carrot family, although the leaves almost look like yuccas because there's little projections on the side of these long, thin, sort of sword-like and succulent-feeling leaves. But it's not related to yuccas at all. It's, like I say, in the carrot family, these characteristic kind of spherical flower heads with small little sort of greenish white flowers on top. This is one that is again a remnant dependent species. This one I believe is an 8, and rattlesnake master was also used a lot. It was used medicinally by Native Americans, and then it's also was used to make cordage. And so I believe there have been like sandals found in Missouri in archaeologic sites made from cordage from this rattlesnake master. And then kind of a prairie gem for many people, and the highlight of fall on the prairies is finding the downy gentian. And these
All right, everyone. I am so sorry about this. I was hoping that we would make it through the rest. I am going to again restart the video where we left off. I hope that my neighbors are watching some great Netflix movies or something, pulling the bandwidth. So I will return just very shortly with the video again here.
Late summer, fall vegetation, without the flowers, you just never find it. But when you see it in flower, just a gorgeous plant. And this one also, a really good remnant dependent plant, is a 9. Okay, we have kind of an interesting little find here. This small little purplish flower, an interesting one. It's not just like a prairie plant. It likes kind of open areas, but in a number of different habitats. But this one is called clammy kufia, and if you feel the stem, there's little glandular hairs on it that give it just a real sticky feeling. So it's really notable because of that sticky feeling you get when touching the plant. So this is clammy kufia, and as it turns out, this one is new to our list for Golden Prairie. So even with over 300 and about 320 species on the list. We're still finding occasionally new species out here. On our spring walk, we found a couple new species, and it looks like this one is a new one for the list, and so we're still adding. Bright purple here is ironweed. And this one is seems to be the good prairie one, called like curly-topped ironweed, which is a remnant-dependent species. There are a couple kinds of ironweed, but this is the most prairie-dependent one. And then also around here we have lots of the seed heads from gray-headed coneflower. And the gray-headed coneflower is not an echinacea like the pale purple. This is a ratibida, but it does have, when it's in flower, the ray flowers, the petals will droop down, hence the name coneflower. Forms kind of like a cone, and this is what it looks like in seed. And when you break the seed apart, it also has kind of a pleasant smell. I know this is one that is frequently very common in plantings and in reconstructions. Now we're kind of down in a little prairie swale, which is kind of the low spot where water will drain off the prairie. It's like doesn't hold water enough to be really considered a stream, but it is a drainage way through the prairie that does stay moister than the upland and drier sites. And so as a result, there's different things that you can find down here. The classic grass you find in prairie swales and in wet prairies in Missouri is cordgrass, and this is cordgrass. This is it with the seed heads on it, so that's what that looks like. You can also tell it if you very carefully start to rub your hand like down on the leaves. You'll feel the roughness, which could just slice your skin wide open. That's why cordgrass is also sometimes referred to as ripgut. You have to be careful walking through it because the little projections on the side of the leaves, if you get them, if you're kind of going against the grain, they will really slice you. So this is characteristic of the bottomland prairies, the characteristic grass, but there are a number of characteristic forbs or wildflowers down here too. There's the sneezeweed, real pretty, the yellow flowers, and the ends of the like petals on the ray flowers have kind of indentations. It's characteristic. There's a purple-headed sneezeweed you find up in drier parts of the prairie earlier in the summer, and then this one is usually in like the late summer and into the fall, with yellow centers to it. And then right over here is a plant called boneset. And this is a plant that apparently was used extensively for medicinal reasons for the Native Americans, but then for later colonists and that too. So boneset, again, it's typically found in the swales or the wetter areas on the prairies, and was a very important medicinal plant. We also have here swamp agrimony during the summer. It had, all these were small little yellow flowers, and now it's going to seed, but it's typical of these wetter areas. And then the shrubs you see right over here are indigo bush. And indigo bush is a close relative of lead plant, the same genus as lead plant, but this one tends to get a little bit taller. It also is really much just like the swales or wetter areas like this, and you don't find it up in most of the prairie. But the leaves look like lead plant, and the flowers, when it flowers, it's got the little sort of tubular purple flowers with the yellow stamens, just just like the lead plant does. We're really fortunate to see this beautiful golden garden spider. They seem to have quite a few common names: yellow garden spider, golden garden spider. It's also called Argiope, which I think is the genus for this group of spiders, but they're really notable. I believe they're one of our largest at least orb weaving spiders, but they are one of them that make the beautiful spider webs. This one is a little more closed in, and characteristically they have kind of a bright white zigzag strip of silk through it called the stabilementum, which I don't think anybody's quite sure exactly why the garden spiders put that on their web. I think it might be to kind of tighten it up. Maybe it's to kind of allow birds to see it so they don't fly into the web. But anyway, this one doesn't have it. But there's no mistaking the spider itself. They're, like I say, one of our largest ones out here, very brightly colored. I believe all these larger ones you see are females, that the males are actually very small. So when you see these nice big spiders on the webs, that those are going to be the females. But a very striking spider. And also this one shows their predatory behavior very well. Looks like it's feeding on a grasshopper that got caught in its web, and grasshoppers are really abundant out here right now. So it's very appropriate for the garden spider to have got one in its web and be feeding on it now. In the spring, we got to see blue wild indigo, and here it is now. So it appears that this one had successfully, the flowers were successful and it's produced fruit, and so there should be some seeds inside these pods. So this is what's left of the blue indigo we saw in the spring, but at that time we didn't see some of these other plants that have come up around it. So we now have some of the grass leaf goldenrod, in a different genus from the other goldenrods. It used to be, I guess, a true goldenrod, and now it's in a different genus, but it's still called the grass leaf goldenrod. This little aster, white heath aster, and then we also have some mountain mint. This is slender mountain mint. There's some of it scattered all around through here. Again, this is usually a very good plant for insect pollinators during the summer when it's in flower, but now it's going to seed, and it turns kind of blackish like this when the seed heads are getting ripe, and there would be little seeds inside there. A real classic plant of swales and kind of wettish areas out in prairies is the sawtooth sunflower. Sawtooth sunflowers are ones that can grow to be extremely large. This is a good size one, but they even get quite a bit taller than this. Real pretty yellow sunflower flowers on top of them. But then this big long stem, the stem is real smooth, the leaves are pretty smooth, and so this is a plant that you typically find in these swale type habitats. And then we've just discovered this is what we think is, I believe it's called orange coneflower. It's Rudbeckia, or it's in the genus with black-eyed Susans and sweet coneflower, but this is not one of those. We think it's one called Rudbeckia fulgida, which, if so, would be another new species for the prairie. So we're still continuing even today to find new species for Golden Prairie to add to the overall plant list. Beneath the sneezeweed and the boneset here in this part of the swale, you can also see the bright blue flowers of this lobelia. It's called great blue lobelia, or it's sometimes even called blue cardinal flower, because these flowers are in the same genus. They're very closely related to cardinal flower, which is a very striking red colored flower, and this one is blue. So this is the great blue lobelia, or blue cardinal flower. So far today, as last time, we talked about adding a few new plant species to our list for the prairies. And that kind of brings up the topic of sort of inventory and research. And so the Prairie Foundation is very interested in learning more about our prairie and other native grassland communities, and using our prairies for especially sort of non-invasive research and inventory to try and learn more about the prairies that we own, but then also use it to expand our knowledge of the whole prairie ecosystem, with hopefully the idea of more information will allow us to protect more of the grasslands as we discover their
Okay, one more time, we are going to restart and finish the conclusion of the video. Again, thank you so much for your patience as we deal with these technical difficulties today.
prairies. And that kind of brings up the topic of sort of inventory and research. And so the Prairie Foundation is very interested in learning more about our prairie and other native grassland communities, and using our prairies for especially sort of non-invasive research and inventory to try and learn more about the prairies that we own, but then also use it to expand our knowledge of the whole prairie ecosystem, with hopefully the idea of more information will allow us to protect more of the grasslands as we discover their benefits in that and can pass that on, and then to better take care of these little treasures. So Golden Prairie is a good example. We have done over the years, we have done many different projects out here. We of course try and keep an inventory on the plant species we find here. It started out with a very good comprehensive plant survey by Doug Ladd of the Nature Conservancy in the late 1990s. He surveyed all the Missouri Prairie Foundation prairies at that time. So that gave us a very good basic list to work from. And so now we just, when we do find something additional, we just add it onto the list. But then we have in more recent years also done more precise ecological monitoring. That was done by Justin Thomas and the Institute of Botanical Training, Ecological integrity survey that's been done on many of our prairies, but Golden Prairie was one of our first ones for doing that. And then through the years, whenever we've had opportunities, surveys have been done here on breeding birds, on grassland breeding birds, on community health index. We've had surveys on the herps of Golden Prairie, the reptiles and amphibians, on bees and odonates or dragonflies and damselflies. We have had surveys done on the little headwater streams found here, the aquatic resources, including the macroinvertebrates, the kind of larger invertebrates that you find in streams. So, and then more recently, there have been some surveys done on the soils of the prairie, on small mammals. So we have done surveys and inventory projects on many aspects of the prairie ecosystem here, and we hope to continue. And we like to try and work with people that are in the field that are interested in doing research and inventory, and providing them some of the sort of field laboratories to work in to try and learn more about this ecosystem.
All right. Well, it's great to have everyone here. And I thank you so much, Bruce, for the wonderful presentation, and be willing to come out and do this video with me on the prairie, and to share this with all of our viewers. And thank all of you who were very patient with our technological challenges. It's wonderful that we are able to share the prairie virtually over Zoom, but also sometimes technology creates some problems that we don't expect. I will say, in light of that, because we had interruptions in the video, we will also upload the full virtual hike with Bruce to YouTube. So we will, of course, have the recording of the webinar, but we will also upload the whole virtual hike video, so you can watch that all the way through on YouTube. And we will include that link when we send the email out to everyone tomorrow. So thank you all for sticking with us, and thank you, Bruce. We do have some really interesting questions from folks. And so a lot of them are actually about specific plants. So, we can start with a few of those. So Bruce, one of the questions that we had was about violet wood sorrel. And the question was, is violet wood sorrel an annual or a perennial?
Okay, and first of all, let me just start by saying thanks, Emily. You did a great job. I kind of drug you all through the prairie and through a lot of areas that it was kind of challenging to get through, and with the cord on the microphone, and plants kept grabbing at it, so that was kind of challenging. And then you just did a great job of weaving together all the short little clips we took over the prairie that morning into this video. So great job. And so thanks a lot for doing that and turning it into such a great video. As far as the violet wood sorrel, it's a perennial. So most of the prairie wildflowers are perennials. There are some annuals, but most of them are perennials, and the violet wood sorrel is one of those.
We also had a question about the blue hearts. And so you mentioned in the video that blue hearts is partially parasitic. Do we know what it is parasitic upon? And do we know the C value of those plants that it is that the blue hearts parasitizes?
I'm not sure what plants are, if there are just a certain plant or plants that it is kind of partially parasitizing. I'm not sure, but it is only found in pretty much the highest quality natural communities. I know it is found in the more open glades and rockier glades, as well as in prairies. But I'm not sure just what specific like coast plants that it might key into, or if it's just in general. I'm not sure on that. But it is when you find it being having that C value of 10, it's always great when you find it, because you're probably in a very good remnant community.
Right. And we also were asked if you could describe what it means. What does hemiparasitic mean? So we said partially parasitic and hemiparasitic. You just clarify the meaning of those sort of technical terms that we've been using.
Right. I think they're basically used sort of interchangeably. But it's not like something like people might be familiar with plants like Indian pipe, which have no green on them, and they're totally dependent on other plants for their nutrients. And so the hemiparasites would get some nutrients from other plants, but I don't know just strictly how dependent they are. They do get some nutrients from them, but they are green and can produce, their own food also.
Right. All right. Another specific plant question. Is sawtooth sunflower related to Maximilian sunflower?
They're both in the same genus. So the genus for all of our native sunflowers is Helianthus. So they are two species in that genus. I'm not really that familiar with Maximilian sunflower. While it's considered a native plant in Missouri, I don't know if I have ever seen it myself, or other people haven't really mentioned it too much in native habitats. So it does seem to be one that's added to seed mixes a lot. But as far as really finding it in native habitats, it's one I'm not really familiar with. My understanding is that it looks very much like sawtooth sunflower, but I think on the Maximilian sunflower, the stems have kind of a rough feel to them, and maybe both surfaces of the leaves, where on the sawtooth sunflower, the stem is smooth. And I think at least one of the leaf surfaces is smooth also. So that, I believe, is the main way you tell them apart.
Okay, great. This is another specific plant question. Is the Chlamycophila a prairie species, or is it adapted to open woodland sites too?
It can be in like open woodland sites. I know I've seen it kind of like at the edge of glades, not necessarily out in the middle part, but it kind of the kind of woodland border of glades. I've seen it in places like that, and other kind of small woodland openings. So it's like its C value is in the middle. It's not, I don't think it's got a real specific habitat, but it does seem to like kind of open areas. I've never seen it just like in the middle of the woods. It does seem to take some kind of opening.
Okay, great. And then one final specific plant question. I think this was a question about the description of little blue stem. Could you describe it again? Unfortunately, this was a part where kind of the video, I lost the internet connection, so we may have lost a little bit about little blue stem. And is it the one that has like turns that kind of purplish in the fall?
Yeah, little blue stem is the one that gets that kind of wine red color in the fall that makes it really attractive, and then it really kind of stands out because most of the grasses just kind of adhere to more of that kind of tan color, and so it has a distinctive kind of purplish tinge to it. Yeah, basically, when it's producing the seeds, it seems like from the stem, the seeds there's just kind of a row of seeds that makes kind of a curl, kind of a half circle curl off the side of the stem. So instead of the flowers and then the seeds being in like a tighter inflorescence at the end of the stem, it tends to be along most of the stem. You'll see these little sort of curls of seeds coming off the side, and it can be really attractive too when it's in seed, but when you get the light shining through it, because those just seem to really stand out, almost sort of glow when the light goes through it. It's I guess like the fuzziness, the hairiness in the seeds. And so, it'll really stand out. Looking at it one way, you might not notice it. And then when you look back more into the sun, it'll look like, it's just a field of silver with all the glowing off the little seed clusters on the little blue stem.
Yeah, little blue stem, it's beautiful on the prairie.
Just wanted to go ahead and keep this Q&A session going since Emily is having some technical difficulty. Emily, are you back? Okay. All right. Thank you.
All right. Okay. So, Bruce, we also had a couple of questions about Golden Prairie itself. One was about the size of Golden Prairie, and is it the largest prairie that MPF has? And also, if you could repeat what type of prairie Golden Prairie is. That may be another place where the transmission cut a little bit.
Yeah. As far as like the prairie community type, Golden Prairie is dry mesic sandstone shale prairie. Most of our prairies in Missouri are dry mesic, with the exceptions of ones that like some of the Luss Hill prairies that are very dry, a few others that may be like very dry on ridge tops would be considered a dry. And then if you get down like next in a swale or down like at the base of a hill where it's decidedly moister, that would be a mesic prairie. But most of our prairies in Missouri are dry mesic. And then this one's farmed on sandstone or shale. This one is sandstone. But that's one of the main types of prairie that's remaining in Missouri. There's a little bit of what's considered hard pan prairie there, and there are the prairie swales. But most of the prairie is the dry mesic sandstone prairie community type. And as far as the size, Golden Prairie is 320 acres is the good remnant. There's another, I think it's 310 acres that brings the whole site, the whole sort of area we own to 630 acres. But there's the good remnant prairie. There's 110 acres that sticks off one corner, and that's a planting. It was a crop field that's been planted. And then there's a area that's just slightly separated across the gravel road to the northwest, and that's some of that's been plowed, and some of it is prairie, but it's a much more degraded prairie than the main part of Golden Prairie. I believe Golden Prairie is the largest, the whole tract, the 630 acres is the largest tract that MPF owns, but there's another one pretty close to that, the Denison, Latner, and Pleasant Run Creek prairies, which are basically contiguous, and so I think they're very close to that in size. And then we have the Lordy Marker Prairie, a pretty new one that's about 400 acres that we own. Almost 100 acres, I think 90 acres is a good remnant prairie, and then the rest is has had various disturbance that is being so it's being like reconstructed in other parts of it.
Great, thank you, Bruce. Have a question about prairie management. So when we manage our remnants with MPF, how often do we burn? And are any of our prairies ever cut for hay as a management practice?
Well, until we owned them, basically all of them were hay prairies. So basically all of them, that's the way they stayed prairies for, you know, all the time since it was settled until we got them, was primarily as hay prairies. Nowadays, we haven't generally been doing too much haying on them. We do hay like the fire lines and that, but we do sometimes, and starting to for a little bit kind of work some haying into it. So it's not like the annual haying of large portions of it, but haying just little parts of it in some years is something that might be beneficial to certain elements of the prairie community. And so we're doing starting to do some of that again. As far as burning, we don't burn the whole part of any prairie in a given year. Typically we'll burn up to half, usually more like maybe a third of it each year, and then rotate that around. So there's usually most of our prairies, almost all of them in recent years, there's been a part that's been burnt each year, but then there's also unburnt parts that are available throughout the winter for wildlife cover, for insects that are hibernating in the thatch and things like that.
Great, thank you, Bruce. We also have a question that's actually comparing Golden Prairie to another prairie in Missouri. And so David asks, how does Golden Prairie compare to Prairie State Park in terms of plant communities? And I don't know how familiar you are with Prairie State Park to be able to answer that question, but that was one that was put to you.
Yeah, I'm a little familiar with it. And much of Prairie State Park, it's a large expanse of prairie landscape, but much of that was farmed. So it was composed of a number of different landowners, and there were some parcels of that were pretty nice prairie. And then there's other parts that were farmed or much more degraded as part of the overall complex that is Prairie State Park. So you'd have to look like, say, at a particular part of it. Prairie State Park has some parts that are really nice, but then a lot of it is more degraded or had past uses. Golden Prairie, the 320 acres is really good. and like a community health index score is really high on it. So so that part, the main part of Golden Prairie is really good, but overall Prairie State Park is bigger, but has a lot more other land use kind of mixed in with it.
Yeah, thank you. And speaking of Prairie State Park, so folks may know it because of the bison herd that is there. And so we had a question actually about whether in any of our remnant prairies you can distinguish remnant buffalo wallows in the prairie. And is this a kind of disturbance that has impacted like plant communities long term?
Yeah, that's a good question, because the whole issue of bison in Missouri is still really cloudy. Most of the historical references don't really talk about bison in Missouri when the first like Euro-Americans moved in, and a lot of people feel that bison probably were not a main driver of our prairies in Missouri compared to like when you get out into Kansas. When you get out into like the Flint Hills of Kansas, there were large herds of bison out there. Bison were definitely part of that system, the grazing of the bison. I've seen places out there that people call buffalo wallows, and I'm sure those were. So when you get out there, it's definitely a thing. Here in Missouri, like I say, it's still really debatable if bison were ever really that abundant enough. There would have been some bison around, but just a few bison sort of here and there, as opposed to the big herds that really had a major influence in prairie ecology out there. So that's something we haven't gotten into. They can be hard animals to manage and like I say, it's really kind of debatable how much influence that bison really had in Missouri, and especially our prairies to the east. So that's that's kind of how we look at it.
Thank you, Bruce. And then one more kind of question about our prairie, sort of the characteristics of our prairies. And then we have a couple of resource questions that I'll get to. But this one, Sharon asks, have you noticed the soil depth increasing over the years? And so that may not just be increasing in soil depth, but maybe there have been other changes in soil depth, as in the time that you've been with MPF, or with changing management practices. So it's one curious if you have any thoughts about a question about soil depth increasing, or if you want to broaden that out to just changes in soil depth on the prairies that we manage.
I certainly haven't noticed any, but I don't get on them and that much, or have a way to really even check anyway. And soil depth on our prairies in southwest Missouri is going to be so variable. It would probably be very hard to tell, because the prairies in southwestern Missouri are basically pretty rocky, and you can go to pretty much any of our prairies and see places where there will be rock exposed, and not just gravel. I mean, bedrock exposed, big rock. And so basically there you have a soil depth of 0. And so, between rocks, how deep it can get, is hard to say, or on some slopes and that. We really have that to thank for having our prairies, because if the southwestern prairie soils were deep and rich like they were in northern Missouri, where it was glaciated, then we might not have any prairies at all, or certainly we wouldn't have very many, because they would have been plowed up. So the fact that the soil's depth is generally going to be fairly shallow because of all the rock, that's why we have our prairies at all. North Missouri, that had the good soils to plow up, there's just almost nothing there in most cases. What used to be millions of acres of prairie, and now it's just totally gone. So I haven't noticed anything with the soils myself. Even if there was a way to do it, as far as building up the depth of the soil, that would probably be very slow. I don't know specifically on prairies, but I've heard things like it takes thousands of years to make an inch of soil, that kind of thing. So building up new soil would probably be a very slow process, and it would probably take quite a while of somehow very accurate measurements to really be able to tell. However, we are very concerned about soils, and over the years we have done some soil samples that we have sent to University of Missouri, Columbia, their soils department, as far as looking at like the soil microbes, the microscopic and somewhat larger little things in the soil. I think one of their in one of the prairie journals, one of the MU soil scientists had mentioned that as far as like the microbial activity, that our remnant prairie soils in these good remnants has like the most diverse soil biota that they had found on any major ecosystem in the world. And so that's still largely unknown, but in the last few years we have been working with a soil scientist from MU who has sampled the soil in a number of our prairies and is looking to even take it a step up to use some of the most current really high-tech sophisticated techniques to try to find out what it is in the soil between the different types of fungi and bacteria and invertebrates, and just to try and find out what is it in the prairie soils that make it so good. And I know it's pretty startling what they found as far as like comparing prairie soils to like any kind of ag soils, as far as how much more abundant and diverse all the soil biota is on their remnant prairies. So it's probably not so much how deep the soil is as much as it is how rich and what makes up the soil, you know, especially the topsoil, those top layers, what makes it up would be real crucial. Hello again.
I'm back. Okay, thank you for answering the question about soils. I think we actually have some, there may be at least one webinar there's previously recorded about prairie soils. And so please do check out our YouTube channel that has recorded
spring, I think it was, this spring, I think it was Sam Lord is the one that did the webinar on soils. And so he's the one that's been doing quite a bit of sampling on soils on MPF prairies. He said it's great to have a resource like that to be able to get soil samples from a really good remnant natural community. And he was, I met him out there as he was taking some samples for this next round of studies they're going to be doing on them.
Great. And so then we have a couple of reference questions. So one question was from Amanda asking, what is your favorite key for asters and for goldenrods?
I don't really know. I haven't checked out that many keys. Mostly I have just used the Flora Missouri myself, both the original Flora Missouri and then the 3-volume set that George Askiavich did a few years ago. So that's the main one I've used, but they can be difficult. It's nice. There are some other places now, in fact, well, it's not exactly a key, but a way to really be able to see what the different kinds look like. And they don't have everyone on it yet, but there's a website, I believe it's called Missouri Plants. And it's maintained through the Missouri Native Plant Society. And it's got excellent photos of flowers, close-ups of flowers, leaves, basal leaves, all kinds of things. That is just a wonderful source to go to try and see if the plant you've got, if it fits that description, or you can see right there what the characteristics are that you're trying to find. And I know there's some other really good websites out there too. But as far as keys, mostly I've just used the Flora Missouri myself.
Great. And so relatedly, and I think maybe one of your answers to that question is also an answer to this one. Is there a good resource for remnant dependent plants and their CC values?
Well, probably the best reference, well, and I can't even remember the exact year. I think it may be on the MPF website, a link to it, or that's certainly something we could provide. But there was a paper, the most recent paper that was done several years ago by Doug Ladd and Justin Thomas, and it was like an ecological checklist for the flora Missouri. And so it goes through and does a list of all the species that are in Missouri, that are known from Missouri. And for all the native species, it has the C value. And so that's where the C value is kind of defined. So that would be the best reference. And then it discusses a little bit about the idea of the C value and that sort of thing. So we could make that, we could get a site for the source of that. And one thing to remember too is this, the coefficients of conservatism aren't only for prairie species, it's for all species. So whether or not it's a woodland species, whether or not it's a forest species, if it's found in glades, if it's found in wetlands, if it's an aquatic species, they're all included in there. So there's C values for all the plants in Missouri, because it's not really looking just at the prairie type, but it's looking at, is this a plant that when you find it, it's basically going to be in a remnant situation as opposed to a much more disturbed situation. And it also helps because really even a lot of the things we call prairie plants, they're not only found in prairies. Many of them are the same species you can find in glades, which are really kind of extremely dry prairies, but many of the same species you can find in glades, in woodlands, especially open woodlands and savannas and that. So with that checklist, it gives a C value by how characteristic that plant is of a remnant habitat, whether or not it's a prairie, it's a woodland, a glade, or whatever. But it's been very useful for us in looking at our prairies.
Great, thank you, Bruce. I also wanted to mention very briefly that we received a comment in the Q&A from Holly Stansberry, who is Lowell Pugh's daughter, and she wanted to express her thanks for this presentation. And I wanted to also express my thanks to Lowell and her family for helping to preserve this really wonderful gem of a remnant prairie that we have in Southwest Missouri. And it has been my absolute pleasure to spend a good number of hours with Bruce on this prairie, both in the spring and now, and getting to know it. It is a real gem. It is really beautiful. And I want to emphasize that the Missouri Prairie Foundation prairies, including Golden Prairie, are open to the public for use on foot. So for hiking, photography, etc., the kind of thing we were doing out on the prairie, when we were recording this webinar. and that you can learn more about visiting our prairies and more about Golden Prairie and our other prairies at moprairie.org/where-we-work. And we will include that link in the follow-up email. But it is a real pleasure to get out on the prairie if you were able to do so. And we hope that you have gotten a taste of what that's like with this webinar. I think, Bruce, that is the last of kind of the questions that we have. And so thank all of you for sticking with us. Thank you, Bruce, for staying on a little longer to answer all of the questions that folks had. We really appreciate it. We're hoping to do more of these next year, maybe with different prairies. So this is exciting, to be able to share MPF's prairies with you all in this format. If you did enjoy this presentation, we hope that you will join us on October 11th for the MPF webinar with Robbie Dorhoff on old pesticides like dicamba and 2,4-D causing new problems. And you can always see our recorded webinars from previous instances of this series on our YouTube channel, which Haley, I believe, linked in the chat, and we're going to link again in the follow-up email. So thank you all. Have a really wonderful evening. Thank you again, Bruce, and thank you all for your patience as we shared this hike with you today. Take care.
Thanks a lot.